The final turn onto the estate road was less a path and more a suggestion, swallowed whole by grasping tendrils of ivy and the skeletal arms of ancient oaks. My meticulously organized sedan, a mobile workshop of brushes, solvents, and the specialized tools of my trade, felt absurdly out of place. Every item in its custom-fitted compartments was secured, labeled, and ready for deployment. That was me, Reid, in a nutshell: order, precision. A quiet dedication to resurrecting what others considered lost. My solitary life suited me, leaving ample room for the intricate dance of restoration, the patient alchemy of bringing forgotten beauty back into the light. But this, the so-called manor I'd inherited from a distant, almost mythical relative, was a different beast entirely. It wasn't merely lost, it felt abandoned by time itself. The gravel crunched under my tires, a sound swallowed instantly by the oppressive silence of the overgrown grounds. Ahead, through a veil of weeping willow branches that scraped against the windshield, the house emerged. It wasn't grand, not in the way one imagines stately homes. It was vast, a hulking mass of darkened stone and timber, sprawling low against the bruised autumn sky. Windows, some shattered, others opaque with grime, stared out like dead eyes. The roofline sagged in places, a testament to decades, perhaps a century of neglect. A shiver, not entirely from the biting wind, traced its way down my spine. The air here was heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else, a musty mineral tang that spoke of profound age and disuse. I parked the car near what might have once been a carriage house, now a ruin of collapsed beams and moss-eaten slate. The main entrance was a formidable affair, a pair of oak doors, black with time and grime, set beneath a collapsing stone archway. A rusty iron knocker, shaped like a grimacing gargoyle, seemed to mark my arrival. My gloved hand paused before touching it. There was no one to announce my presence to, only the house itself. It slid into the lock with a grating protest, turning with a reluctant groan that echoed inside the silent hall. A breath I hadn't realized I was holding escaped me. I pushed. The doors swung inward with a drawn-out shriek of tortured hinges, revealing a cavernous gloom. Dust motes, disturbed by the sudden ingress of light, danced in the shafts that pierced the gloom from high, grimy windows. My first steps into the manor were tentative. Each creak of the floorboards beneath my boots seemed amplified, swallowed and then spat back out by the vast, empty space. My senses, usually so attuned to the subtle nuances of wood grain or the faint scent of linseed oil, were overwhelmed. This wasn't just old, it felt sick. The sheer scale of the decay was daunting even for me. I'd tackled rot and ruin before, but this was an entire ecosystem of entropy. I ran a gloved hand over a mahogany newel post, its once polished surface now dull and gritty. My fingers brushed against a thick layer of dust, revealing a ghost of intricate carving beneath. There was beauty here, beneath the grime, beneath the rot. That was what called to me, the potential. This wasn't merely a house, it was a vast, complex antique, awaiting my touch. My gaze swept the hall, taking in the skeletal remains of what might have been a console table, a shattered chandelier hanging precariously from the ceiling. My eyes, however, snagged on something less obvious. It was unlike the other doors in the hall, lacking any ornamentation, just rough-hewn planks reinforced with rusted iron straps. It looked less like a pantry or a closet door, and more like an entryway to something else. I approached it slowly, my flashlight beam crawling over its surface. There was no handle, only a massive, equally rusted padlock. This wasn't just a storage space, it felt like a deliberate containment. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it pressed against me, a silent, insistent presence. My restorer's mind immediately began cataloging possibilities: a wine cellar, a root cellar, perhaps an old coal chute. But the sheer solidity of the door, its formidable locking mechanism, suggested something more significant. A faint, almost subliminal thrum seemed to vibrate against my eardrum, a low, steady hum, like deep earth breathing. My curiosity, a professional instinct honed by years of uncovering hidden histories, warred with a nascent unease. The solicitor's documents hadn't mentioned anything like this, just boilerplate descriptions of the property. But then, they rarely delved into architectural specifics. This door, so starkly different from the rest of the house's faded grandeur, felt like a deliberate secret, a deliberate seal. This house wasn't just old, it had been allowed to fester, to decay, to hold its breath for decades. And that door, I felt with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, was not merely a door to a simple cellar. It felt like an entryway to something far deeper, perhaps even to the underground tunnel system mentioned in a passing, almost cryptic note scribbled on the very last page of the inheritance papers, dismissed by the solicitor as an old servant's passage. Likely collapsed. My determination, usually focused on the delicate work of bringing fragile objects back to life, now faced a new, more formidable challenge. This house, in its overwhelming decay, was already beginning to demand more than just my professional skill. It demanded my attention, my patience, and perhaps even a piece of my peace. My hands, usually steady and precise, trembled ever so slightly as I carried my tool chest into what I designated as the main study. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the grimy windows, illuminating a room swallowed by neglect. A grand, carved desk sat at the center, its surface scarred by time and rot, surrounded by shelves that sagged under the weight of forgotten books. This was where I would begin. A tangible project, something to anchor me against the overwhelming quiet of the manor. I laid out my chisels, brushes, and solvents on a drop cloth. The scent of linseed oil and beeswax, familiar and comforting, cut through the pervasive dampness and the faint, unsettling odor of something indefinable like old paper and forgotten earth. I started on a mahogany armchair, its velvet upholstery shredded, but the frame beneath promised a sturdy, elegant form. My fingers traced the intricate carvings, a meditative act that usually quieted my mind. But the house wasn't quiet. It hummed, a low, resonant thrum that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards beneath my feet. I dismissed it as the wind or the ancient structure settling. Old houses groaned, old houses sighed. I reached for my smallest gouge, the one with the finely honed edge, only to find the spot where I'd placed it empty. I frowned, scanning the cloth. My system was meticulous. Every tool had its place. Perhaps I'd simply set it aside for a moment, distracted. I found it nestled amongst the larger clamps, a place it absolutely did not belong. A flicker of unease, quickly suppressed. Fatigue, I told myself. The long drive, the unsettling grandeur of the place. Hours bled into one another. The armchair slowly began to reveal its original beauty beneath layers of grime and decay. I was deep in the focused calm of my work, the world outside the small radius of my lamp fading into shadow. Then a distinct thump from upstairs. Not a creak, not a groan, but a heavy, deliberate sound, like something falling or being dropped. I froze, my hand hovering over the delicate wood. The air in the room suddenly felt colder, denser. I listened, my breath held tight in my chest. Nothing, only the low hum of the house, now seeming less like a natural resonance and more like a held breath. It sounded thin, reedy, utterly unconvincing. No reply, of course not. I was alone. I had to be. I went back to work, but the rhythm was broken. Just the antique furniture, silent witnesses to generations of forgotten lives. The feeling of being watched grew. It wasn't a prickling on the back of my neck, but a subtle pressure, like the air itself was leaning in, observing. I tried to rationalize it away. The isolation, the sheer scale of the house, the ghost stories I'd read about these old places as a child. But logic felt flimsy here, like a brittle leaf against a rising wind. As dusk began to paint the sky outside in bruised purples and grays, I decided to pack up. My focus was gone. As I carefully put my tools away, I noticed something odd about the large, ornate fireplace. One of the decorative marble tiles, usually flush with the wall, was slightly askew. I knelt, running my fingers over the cold stone. It felt loose. Curiosity, stronger than the growing unease, took hold. I pressed on the tile and it shifted with a faint click. I reached in, my fingers brushing against rough-hewn stone and something metallic. I pulled it out. A rusted iron ring attached to a heavy wooden panel. My breath caught. This wasn't just a loose tile. This was a hidden door. With a grunt, I pulled the ring. The panel, surprisingly heavy, swung inward with a grinding protest, revealing a narrow, vertical shaft. I shone my powerful restoration lamp into the opening. The beam vanished into an inky blackness that seemed to swallow the light. This wasn't a forgotten cupboard. This was an entrance, a place that felt like it had been holding its breath for centuries. I hesitated, the low hum of the house now feeling less like a vibration and more like a heartbeat, heavy and slow. Every instinct screamed at me to close the panel, to forget this discovery. But the lure of the unknown, The professional curiosity of an architectural secret was a powerful current. I needed to know what lay beneath. A grand carved desk sat at the center, its surface a mosaic of grime and scratches, a silent testament to decades of abandonment. It was a magnificent piece, dark oak, heavy and ornate, with clawed feet and a series of deep, imposing drawers. The kind of desk that demanded respect, even in its current state of disrepair. I set down my tools with a soft clang that echoed too loudly in the cavernous room. My plan was to start here, to peel back the layers of decay from this central piece, believing that restoring its grandeur would somehow set a precedent for the rest of the house. I ran a gloved hand over the pitted wood, feeling the grain beneath the accumulated filth. There was a faint, cloying scent clinging to it, not just dust and decay, but something else. Something subtly metallic and sweet, like old blood mixed with dried potpourri. It was unsettling, but I pushed it aside, attributing it to the manor's age and forgotten contents. Hours melted away as I worked, lost in the rhythmic scrape of my chisels and the whisper of fine-grit sandpaper. As I reached the final section, a narrow, carved panel along the desk's side, my fingers brushed against a subtle seam, barely visible. It wasn't part of the original design, not a decorative element, but a hairline fracture in the wood that felt intentional. A flicker of curiosity, sharper than my usual professional detachment, urged me to investigate. I pressed along the seam, feeling for a release, a catch, nothing. I tried sliding it, pulling it, still nothing. Then my thumb inadvertently found a small, almost invisible knot in the wood, no bigger than a peppercorn. I pressed it, and with a soft, internal click, the panel sprang inward a fraction of an inch. My breath hitched. A hidden compartment, of course. This house was a labyrinth of secrets. I pried the panel open fully, revealing a shallow recess. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a single leather-bound journal. The leather was dry and brittle, threatening to crack at my touch. A thin, silver clasp held it shut. My gloved fingers carefully unlatched it. The pages within were thick, cream-colored, filled with an elegant, spidery script in faded brown ink. It wasn't a diary. Not exactly. The entries were dated, but disjointed, fragments of observation and cryptic musings. I began to read, the words a whisper in the silent study. The forgetting has begun. A haze upon the mind, a veil drawn over what was once clear. They say the ground hungers. They say the root grows restless. I frowned, reading on. The ground beneath the manor, they say it breathes. The old man, the one who tried to warn them, he vanished. Not just from sight, but from memory. No one recalls his face, his name, his laughter. Vanished from memory. The concept was deeply unsettling. I skipped a few pages, finding an entry dated much later, the handwriting more frantic, less controlled. It takes not flesh, but essence. The knowing, the being, I feel it now, the tendrils reaching, my own name, Reid. Does it truly belong to me? The faces of my kin, fading at the edges of my mind. This place. It seeks to consume the very threads of self. The underground passage. The root system below, it is the mouth. My eyes widened. Reid, the name, my name. I reread the passage, my heart thudding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Was this a historical document, a fictional tale, or something else entirely? The mention of my own name felt like a deliberate, impossible intrusion. I closed the journal, the brittle leather creaking softly. For a moment, a strange blankness descended. What was I just doing? Why was I holding this book? A fleeting disorientation, like waking from a deep sleep and not quite knowing where you are. I blinked, rubbing my temples. Stress, I told myself, isolation. The sheer weight of this decaying house was getting to me. I hadn't had a proper night's sleep in days. This was just my mind playing tricks. The underground passage, it is the mouth. A morbid curiosity. A compulsion I couldn't ignore began to pull at me. The manor was vast, and I had only explored the main floors. The journal spoke of a system, not just a single tunnel. Driven by an urgency I didn't fully understand, I descended to the cellar. In the furthest corner, behind a stack of rotted crates, I found it a low, arched opening, crudely cut into the stone foundation. It was almost perfectly concealed, barely wide enough for me to squeeze through. The beam was swallowed almost immediately, but I could make out the uneven, earthen walls of a narrow passage leading downwards. This was it. The underground tunnel system. I hesitated for a moment, the journal's words ringing in my ears. The ground hungers, the root grows restless. But the determined part of me, the restorer, the one who sought to uncover every secret, pushed me forward. The The passage narrowed, then opened into a wider cavern. The walls here were not stone, but packed earth, crisscrossed with thick, gnarled roots that snaked through the soil like veins. They were everywhere, thick as my arm, twisting, intertwining, creating a grotesque, organic latticework. They pulsed, or perhaps it was just the flicker of my light, giving them the illusion of movement. The air was thick, heavy, pressing down on me. There was no sound down here, not even the distant creak of the manor above. Only the thud of my own heart and the rasp of my breathing. I walked deeper, following the natural curve of the tunnel, my boots sinking slightly into the soft, damp earth. The roots grew denser, forming a living canopy above me, a claustrophobic ceiling. I stopped, shining my light around the vast, silent space. And then it happened again. I stood there, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, and for a split second I couldn't recall what I was looking for. A blank slate. My own name felt like a word someone else had spoken, echoing from a distant room. Reid, they was that me? The thought was fleeting, dismissed almost immediately. It was getting to me, I had to focus. But what was I focusing on? The cellar air hung heavy and still, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something mineral and cold that scraped at the back of my throat. My flashlight beam cut a stark path through the gloom, dancing over sagging shelves of forgotten preserves and crumbling stone walls. The journal's words, a faint echo in my memory, spoke of passages, of a system. Not just a single tunnel, but something more intricate, more insidious. A morbid curiosity, a compulsion I couldn't ignore, pulled me deeper. I ran my gloved hand over the rough-hewn stones, searching for any anomaly, a loose mortar joint, a hidden seam. Dust motes danced in the light, like tiny, frantic spirits. Each creak of the old house above, each distant rustle, seemed amplified down here, pressing in on me. The very silence felt like a presence, watching, hours blurred into a singular, focused hunt. My determination, usually a quiet strength, felt like a desperate fever. Then behind a stack of rotted firewood, half obscured by decades of detritus, I found it. Not a grand archway, but a subtle fissure in the wall, a line that didn't quite match the others. With a grunt, I pulled. A section of the wall, heavy and groaning, pivoted inward with a sound like grinding teeth, revealing a yawning blackness beyond. It felt less like a breath and more like an exhale from something vast and slumbering. This was it, the entrance to the underground tunnel system. The air itself seemed to hum with a forgotten history, a silent language of confinement and decay. I didn't step in, not yet. The sheer scale of the discovery, the implications of its existence, demanded context. I needed to understand what I was looking at, what secrets this manor had buried beneath its foundations. The old manor library, a treasure trove of dust-choked tomes and forgotten ledgers, became my sanctuary and my prison. I pored over brittle deeds, faded maps, and the fragmented personal journals of previous owners I'd found tucked away in forgotten corners. The research was slow, painstaking, like sifting through ash for embers. The earliest records were vague, hinting at the manor's original construction atop ancient foundations. Later entries spoke of strange occurrences. A family in the late 1700s simply vanished, leaving behind a half-eaten meal on the table, their carriage still in the stable. He was found dead in his bed, eyes wide open, a smile frozen on his face, though no cause of death was ever determined. The local lore, recorded in a tattered collection of village tales, referred to the manor as the place where thoughts lose their way. There were scattered accounts of individuals suffering from sudden, profound amnesia or lapsing into states of catatonia after spending extended periods within the manor's walls. As the days bled into weeks, the entity's influence became a constant, insidious companion. My nights were no longer restful. Nightmares, vivid and disorienting, assaulted me. I dreamt I was another person, living a life that wasn't mine, waking with a lingering sense of loss for memories I never had. One night, I dreamt I was carving a familiar antique, my own hands moving with practiced ease, but the object itself was alien, grotesque, pulsing with a faint, internal light. Waking hours offered little reprieve. I'd catch a glimpse of a gaunt face in the reflection of a polished tabletop, only for it to resolve into my own haggard features a moment later. A faint, cloying scent, like decaying flowers and wet earth, would waft through the study, only to vanish when I tried to pinpoint its source. They spoke no words I could discern, but their presence was a constant, unsettling murmur in the background of my thoughts. The memory gaps were the most terrifying. I'd walk into a room, forgetting why I was there. Simple tasks, like mixing a particular varnish or recalling a client's name, would suddenly become monumental struggles. I'd find myself staring at a half-finished restoration, unable to remember when I'd last worked on it or what my next step was. One afternoon, I reached for my coffee cup, only to find it already in my hand, half empty. Had I just poured it, or had it been sitting there for an hour? Panic began to claw at me. My meticulous mind, my very identity, felt like a sandcastle slowly eroding with each tide. Was I truly losing my grip, or was this house, this malevolent presence, actively dismantling me, piece by agonizing piece? The line between what was real and what was a horrifying, manufactured delusion blurred with each passing hour. The answers were down there, I knew it. The journey had been arduous, but the faint draft I'd felt earlier, a whisper of moving air in this stagnant tomb, had led me to a section of wall near the furthest corner. There, half obscured by a collapsed stack of rotting crates, a narrow, crudely cut archway yawned. My breath hitched. This was it. I took a deep, fortifying breath, the determination to uncover the manor's secrets overriding the rising tide of unease. This was what I'd come here for. This was the work. I descended, each step echoing unnervingly in the sudden vastness. The steps gave way to a dirt floor, uneven and slick, leading into what could only be described as an underground tunnel system. The walls were uneven, carved directly from the earth, occasionally shored up with rough-hewn timber that looked centuries old and dangerously brittle. Water dripped somewhere far ahead, a rhythmic plink-plink that seemed to measure the passage of time in this forgotten place. I walked, my footsteps crunching on loose gravel and splashing through shallow puddles. The tunnel wound, twisted, and branched, a labyrinthine nightmare beneath the house. I kept a hand on the rough stone wall, trying to orient myself, but every turn felt identical. Then, a sound. It was the echo of my name, drawn out, distorted. Reid. I stopped dead, my heart racing. Nothing, just the relentless drip, drip, drip. I told myself it was my imagination, the acoustics of the tunnels playing tricks. I pressed on, my grip on the flashlight tightening. The air grew heavier, thick and cloying. The metallic scent intensified, almost suffocating. My mind screamed at me to turn back, but a perverse curiosity, a need to understand, propelled me forward. They grated against my sanity, a relentless, buzzing hum. Then through the din, a single voice rose, clear and terrible. It spoke my name, but it was not my name. It was a name I didn't recognize, yet it felt intimately familiar. Thomas. I stumbled, my light beam dancing wildly. It wasn't a human laugh. It was the sound of crumbling stone, of parched earth. Reid, is that what I call myself now? A wave of nausea washed over me. The tunnel walls seemed to ripple, the stone blurring, shifting. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing it away. When I opened them, the tunnel was different. It wasn't rough-hewn stone anymore. I was standing in a long, narrow corridor, lit by flickering gas lamps. Portraits lined the walls, grim faces staring out from tarnished frames, and in the distance a figure, tall, gaunt, dressed in archaic clothes. It turned slowly, and its face was a blank, featureless expanse. But I knew it. I felt a surge of recognition, a memory that was not mine but felt as real as my own breath. I knew this man, I was, panic clawed at my throat. Who are I croaked. I know me, I remember, I built this. I am its foundation, I am Thomas. My head throbbed, Thomas. The name hammered against my consciousness, trying to dislodge my own. My memories flickered, fragments of my life as Reid the restoration workshop. The smell of turpentine, the delicate touch of a brush on aged wood. They felt distant, fragile like old photographs fading in the sun. This other life as Thomas felt immediate, vibrant, horrifyingly real. I could almost feel the rough fabric of the figure's clothes on my skin, the cold stone of the manor under my feet, not as Reid, but as him. No, I shouted, the sound cracking in the oppressive air. My voice was hoarse, desperate. I am Reid, I restore. I fix things, I came here to fix this house. The corridor shimmered, the gas lamps flickering violently. The blank-faced figure advanced slowly, deliberately. I am fixed. I am part of the house, always have been, always will be. My memories are ours, my identity is ours. I stumbled backward, tripping over something unseen. The light settled on a patch of floor, not wood, but damp, glistening earth. The polished wood, the gas lamps, the portraits, they were gone. It had been an illusion, a horrifying, potent lie. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I scrambled to retrieve the flashlight, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped it again. I cried out, recoiling, my skin crawling. I could feel my mind fraying, the edges of my self-identity dissolving like a photograph left out in the rain. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to focus on one single, undeniable truth: my name, Reid, my work. Restoration. The antique desk I'd been working on before I came to the manor, the intricate inlay I'd spent weeks perfecting. These were real. This was me. When I opened my eyes, the tunnel was just the tunnel, but the blank-faced figure was gone. I stood there, trembling, my breathing ragged. My vision swam, and I felt lightheaded, as if I'd just run a marathon. The encounter had left me profoundly shaken, the world around me seeming subtly wrong, out of focus. I had faced it, or a part of it, and it had shown me a glimpse of its true power, the ability to unmake me, to rewrite my very existence. My sense of self, once so solid, now felt like a fragile, cracked pane of glass, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. I was Reid. I had to be. But the terrifying seed of doubt had been planted, and it was already beginning to sprout. My flashlight lay on its side, a sputtering cyclops eye casting frantic, distorted shadows that writhed and stretched across the earthen floor. I scrambled for it, my fingers slick with cold, clinging mud, the metallic tang of damp soil filling my nostrils. The beam caught me, momentarily blinding, then settled, revealing the slick, packed earth beneath my feet. This was it. The knowledge, fragmented and terrifying, had been trying to surface for days. The air here was a heavy, stagnant blanket, thick with the scent of decay and something else, a faint, almost metallic aroma, like rust mixed with a forgotten crypt. I pushed myself up, my knees protesting, and tried to orient myself. Panic was a hot, sharp blade in my gut, but a desperate resolve flared in response. This was my chance. These tunnels, they had to lead somewhere, anywhere but back into the manor's suffocating embrace. I gripped the flashlight tighter, its plastic casing slick with sweat, and chose a direction, plunging into the gloom. The tunnel twisted and turned. A labyrinth of damp earth and unseen obstacles. Minutes bled into an eternity. My determination, initially a fiery burst, began to flicker. Each turn looked identical to the last. Each stretch of wall felt the same. Was I even moving forward, or just in a slow, agonizing circle? Escape. That was the only thought. After what felt like hours, the tunnel opened into a wider, cavernous space. My light swept across it, revealing not an exit, but rough-hewn stairs carved directly into the earth, leading upwards. Hope surged, quickly followed by a crushing wave of despair as I realized where they led. I recognized the damp stone, the specific way the mortar crumbled. These weren't stairs to freedom. These were stairs to the manor's neglected cellar, a place I had already explored, a place that offered no escape. I stumbled up the steps, my legs heavy, each step a testament to my failing strength. The cellar. When I reached it, felt like a familiar tomb. I needed to get out, not just out of the tunnels, but out of this house. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my phone in my pocket. The screen glowed feebly for a moment, then died. No signal, not a single bar. I tried again, pressing buttons, shaking it, as if the physical act could force a connection. Nothing. I remembered the old rotary phone in the study, a relic I'd initially scoffed at. I burst in, making for the desk where the phone sat like a museum piece. My fingers, numb and clumsy, fumbled with the receiver. I lifted it to my ear, no dial tone. I slammed it back down, a roar of frustration catching in my throat. This was it then. The manor wasn't just isolated, it was cut off. A new wave of resolve, born of pure desperation, washed over me. The doors, the windows, they had to open. I sprinted to the grand oak doors of the main entrance, my shoulders slamming against the heavy wood. I pushed, I pulled, I rattled the ornate brass handles until my knuckles ached. They didn't budge, not an inch. It wasn't just locked. It felt as though the very house had solidified around them, sealing them shut. I moved to the nearest window, a tall, leaded pane overlooking the overgrown gardens. I tried the latch. It was stuck fast, rusted solid, or so it appeared. I braced my foot against the wall and pulled with all my might, grunting with effort. The wood around the frame groaned in protest, but the window remained stubbornly closed. It was as if the glass had fused with the frame, an impenetrable barrier. My mind raced, a frantic hummingbird beating against the cage of my skull. I had to get out. I had to, but why couldn't I remember? Why was it so hard to recall? What was I even looking for? My thoughts blurred, coalescing into a hazy fog. I stood in front of the window, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my hands pressed against the cold glass. and for a terrifying moment, I couldn't remember what I was doing or even why I was doing it. Then a flicker, escape. The word materialized from the haze, sharp and clear. I remembered the underground tunnel system, the dead phone, the sealed doors. The manor was a trap. My gaze fell upon a faint, almost invisible etching on the window frame, obscured by years of grime. I leaned closer, scraping away the dirt with a fingernail. It was a crude, desperate carving, a series of interlocking lines, forming a complex, almost geometric pattern, unlike anything I'd ever seen in the manor before. This wasn't just rust or old wood or bad luck. The house itself was a living, breathing cage, actively resisting my every effort. The entity wasn't just feeding on my memories, it was twisting the very fabric of the manor, binding me to its decaying heart. I was not just trapped by circumstance, but by design. I was truly, utterly alone, and the manor was closing its fists around me. The manor's decay was no longer a passive process. It was an active, malevolent gnawing, a deliberate unraveling of structure and sanity. The air itself felt thick with resistance, pressing against my lungs, whispering doubts into the quiet corners of my mind. My hands, once precise and steady, now trembled with an unfamiliar tremor as I ran them over a section of wall in the deepest part of the cellar, where the foundation stone met raw earth. The whispers intensified here, not actual sounds, but a felt presence, a pressure behind my eyes. My lantern beam cut a trembling circle through the gloom, illuminating a hairline crack in the rough-hewn stone, a seam that had no business being there. It wasn't a natural fissure, it was a scar deliberately hidden. Stone by stone, the concealed entrance gave way, revealing not another root cellar, but a narrow, descending passage. The air grew heavier, thick and cloying, tasting of mineral and age. Water dripped somewhere far off, a morbid clock ticking away the seconds of my descent. The walls here were not brick or dressed stone, but rough, natural rock, smoothed in places by unseen forces or perhaps by countless hands. Deeper I went, the passage twisting and turning, becoming narrower, tighter. It felt like walking into the throat of some colossal, slumbering beast. Then, the tunnel opened into a small, irregular chamber. My lantern beam swept across the rough-hewn walls, illuminating a series of crude carvings, not mere symbols but depictions. Figures, elongated and gaunt, with blank, featureless faces, stood in supplicant poses before a central, swirling vortex. Below them, smaller figures, their forms more defined, seemed to be dissolving, their outlines fading like smoke into the vortex. My light settled on a rough stone plinth in the center of the chamber. Upon it rested a single, bound volume, its cover made of hardened, almost petrified leather. It was not a book, not exactly. It was a collection of brittle, papyrus-like sheets, meticulously pressed and stitched together. The script within was archaic, spidery, almost like a series of stylized ideograms, yet I felt a horrifying, intuitive understanding bloom in my mind as I traced the symbols. It wasn't reading, not truly. It was as if the meaning seeped directly into my consciousness, bypassing language entirely. The entity, it wasn't born of the manor, but had been drawn to it or perhaps to the land before the manor. It fed not on physical substance, but on the very essence of sentient thought, memory, identity, self-definition. It was a parasite, but one that didn't merely consume, it usurped. The entity didn't just steal memories, it ingested them, assimilating them into its own fragmented, ancient consciousness. As it consumed, it replaced, subtly weaving its own discordant threads of delusion into the minds of its hosts, until their reality became its reality. It sought not to kill, but to become. To wear the skin of memory, to live through the stolen identities of others, each consumed self adding another layer to its own monstrous, ever-shifting form. The horror of it rooted me to the spot. This wasn't just about losing my past, it was about losing me. Slowly, irrevocably, my thoughts, my feelings, my very perception of Reid would be overwritten, replaced by its ancient, alien consciousness, until only a shell remained, a puppet animated by its hunger. The journal No, the record, detailed its ancient origins, a primal force awakened by some forgotten upheaval. It spoke of cycles, of periods of dormancy and ravenous awakening. To truly quiet it, to send it back into its long slumber, required a willing sacrifice, not of life, but of self, a complete and conscious offering of a core memory, a foundational pillar of one's identity, chosen freely and given without reservation. It needed to consume a pure, untainted wellspring of selfhood to truly sate its ancient hunger and allow it to solidify its own fragmented being. It meant becoming a ghost in my own mind, a shadow of who I once was, forever incomplete. My hands clenched around the rough edges of the stone plinth. The air in the chamber felt suddenly thin, sharp, like broken glass. The sacrifice wasn't my death, it was the death of Reid. The cost wasn't just high, it was absolute. My hands, once precise and steady, now trembled with a tremor that had nothing to do with cold or exhaustion. It was a deep, internal vibration, a sympathetic resonance with the manor's own decay. My grip on the antique silver letter opener I still carried felt alien, the cool metal a momentary anchor in a sea of shifting perceptions. Names, faces, the very chronology of my life, they all felt like loose pages scattered by an unseen draft, ready to slip away into the void. I knew I was losing myself. The entity was a patient predator, gnawing at the foundations of my being, leaving behind only echoes and fractured images. But a fragment of Reid, the meticulous restorer, stubbornly persisted. It was a spark of defiance, an unyielding refusal to simply dissolve. The methodical part of my mind, the one that analyzed and repaired, was still trying to piece together the shattered landscape of my reality. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and old wood, a smell that had become synonymous with my failing memory. I needed to act, and I needed to act now, before there was nothing left of me to fight with. Then a flicker, not a memory, not exactly, but a sensation, a vivid impression of a hidden space, a place I had stumbled upon weeks ago, deep within the manor's oldest foundations. It had been a narrow, almost forgotten shaft, leading to a small, sealed chamber. Inside, amidst crumbling parchments and a strange, inert crystalline artifact, I had found it, a series of crude, yet disturbingly precise, drawings. They depicted intricate geometric patterns, a vessel, the artifact, and a binding. The sketches implied a transfer, a containment, a way to channel something vast and formless into a physical anchor. At the time, I dismissed it as an archaic curiosity, a forgotten attempt at alchemy or ritual. Now, the fragmented images coalesced into a horrifying, desperate truth. The entity fed on memory, on identity. The drawings, I now understood, detailed a method of creating a potent lure, a concentration of self, to draw the entity into a confined space. The crystalline artifact was the vessel, a conduit, and the binding required a sacrifice. My sacrifice. It wasn't about destroying the entity, I realized with a sickening lurch in my gut, but about containing it, trapping it forever within the manor's deepest recesses. And the only bait powerful enough to draw such an ancient hunger, the only binding agent strong enough to hold it, would be a concentrated essence of what it craved most, a living, conscious identity, my identity, to become the lure, to offer up the very core of my being, the sum total of my memories and experiences as a feast. It meant a profound undoing, a complete erasure of Reid. But if I didn't, the entity would eventually consume everything, not just me, but potentially spread beyond these walls. The choice was stark: self-preservation or a chance to cage the monster, even if it meant my own oblivion. This was my last, desperate act of restoration. I gathered the tools I would need: a heavy lantern, a coil of rope, the strange crystalline artifact I'd retrieved from the hidden chamber, a small, tarnished silver box containing a few carefully selected, personally significant items, a worn photograph, a dried flower, a chipped ceramic shard from my first restoration project. These were the anchors, the physical representations of the memories I would offer. They were the last vestiges of my life, the fuel for the trap. The journey to the underground tunnel system was a descent into the manor's very bones. Water dripped relentlessly from unseen fissures, each drop echoing like a distant tolling bell. The passage narrowed, forcing me to hunch, the rough stones scraping against my coat. It was a claustrophobic embrace, a prelude to the obliteration I sought. The underground tunnel system itself was a labyrinthine network of rough-hewn passages, carved centuries ago for reasons long forgotten. The air hung stagnant, thick with the accumulated dust of ages. Here, the silence was not peaceful, but a heavy, oppressive presence, broken only by the scuttling of unseen things and the ragged sound of my own breathing. The walls were slick with moisture, the floor uneven and treacherous. It felt like the heart of the manor, a place where time itself had stagnated. I set down my lantern, its weak light struggling against the encroaching gloom. The crystalline artifact, once dull and inert, seemed to hum faintly in my hands, a low vibration that resonated with the tremor in my own body. I placed it in the center of the chamber, as indicated by the ancient drawings. Then, with painstaking precision, I began to arrange the items from the silver box around it, each one a tiny, potent spark of my past. The photograph, the flower, the ceramic shard, each placement felt like tearing a piece of myself away, a conscious act of dismemberment. As I worked, a subtle shift occurred. A faint, almost imperceptible hum vibrated through the stone beneath my feet, growing in intensity. The entity was stirring. It sensed the offering, the immense, concentrated lure I was meticulously preparing. It was hungry, and I was ready to feed it one last time. My grip on the antique silver letter opener I still carried felt alien, the cool metal a momentary anchor, though one that threatened to slip from my grasp. The air in the narrow passageway ahead was heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something ancient and metallic, like old blood oxidizing in forgotten corners. I pushed forward, the letter opener a cold, slim promise in my palm. The passage opened into a gaping maw, a raw tear in the earth that swallowed the faint light from the manor above. This was it, the entrance to the underground tunnel system. The descent was steep, the rough-hewn steps slick with a persistent, greasy dampness. The air grew heavier, pressing in, stealing the oxygen from my lungs. I could feel it now, the entity's presence, not as a distinct form, but as a vast, hungry consciousness that pulsed through the very stone around me. It was waiting. It had been waiting for me. My plan was crude, born of desperation, and a fragile understanding gleaned from the manor's hidden journals. The entity fed on identity, on memory. It sought to consume me, to replace me. But what if it could be overwhelmed? What if I could force it to consume something indigestible, something that would choke its parasitic hunger? The letter opener, a tool of delicate separation and precision, was my symbolic weapon. It represented the meticulous act of defining, of restoring, of being. My small flashlight beam struggled against it, carving out a pathetic circle of visibility. The walls, once just rough stone, began to ripple. Shapes formed and dissolved at the periphery of my vision, fleeting glimpses of faces, familiar yet distorted, or impossible geometric patterns that tugged at the corners of my sanity. Then came the sounds, my voice, my father's voice sharp with disappointment, the voice of a colleague mocking a clumsy mistake, the voice of an old flame weeping as I walked away. I make whole. The entity responded with a surge of pure agonizing disorientation. My vision blurred, the tunnel walls twisting into a kaleidoscopic nightmare. My balance faltered, and I stumbled, catching myself on a slick protrusion. The air thickened, sweet and cloying, like decaying flowers, then acrid and metallic, like fresh blood. It was trying to overwhelm my senses, to shatter my perception of reality. Then the true assault began. Key event, a memory flashed before my eyes, so vivid it was real. I was a child, not Reid, but another boy with a different name, a different life. I saw a sunny field, a laughing mother, a dog I'd never owned. It wasn't a memory of mine, but it felt true. A wave of panic washed over me. Was I not Reid? Had I always been someone else? Was my entire life a fabrication? The entity wasn't just showing me false memories. It was trying to implant them, to overwrite my own history, to dismantle the very foundation of who I was. The antique silver letter opener felt less like an anchor and more like a foreign object now, its purpose slipping from my mind. "Who are you?" the collective voice thundered, echoing from the depths of the underground tunnel system. "You have no name, have no past, you are a vessel empty and waiting." A desperate clarity pierced the fog. This wasn't just about my life, it was about myself. I remembered the careful strokes of a brush, the meticulous repair of a cracked porcelain vase, the patient sanding of aged wood. These weren't grand heroic acts, but they were mine. They defined my precision, my focus, my dedication. They were Reid. I gripped the letter opener, its cool metal a sudden, searing point of focus. It was a tool for separation, for definition. "I am Reid," I roared, the sound ragged, defiant, "and I restore." I drove the tip of the letter opener into the damp earth before me, not as a physical weapon, but as an act of will, a declaration. The blade sank easily and a shudder went through the ground. The entity recoiled, a shriek of pure, unadulterated rage vibrating through the air. It wasn't pain, not in the physical sense, but a rejection. a violation. Reveal/discovery. As the entity shrieked, I saw it not as a form, but as a brief, horrifying impression in my mind. A swirling vortex of stolen memories, not just mine, but countless others, all coalescing, attempting to forge a complete new identity. It didn't just consume, it mimicked. It wanted to become the perfect human, a culmination of all the best, most vivid memories it could steal, and I was its current, most delectable source. It wasn't trying to erase me, it was trying to wear me. My essence, my unique blend of experiences and traits, was a thread it wanted to weave into its own fabric. And the very act of restoration, of making something distinctly itself again, was anathema to its parasitic nature. The entity lashed out, a flood of raw psychic energy that hit me like a physical blow, knocking me to my knees. My head swam, my vision fractured into 1,000 shards. It tried to force another identity into my mind, a complete, vibrant life that was not my own, demanding I accept it. But I held fast to the letter opener, to the symbol of my craft. I pictured my hands steady and sure, cleaning a delicate fresco. I remembered the scent of linseed oil, the feel of fine sandpaper. These were the anchors of Reid, the restorer. I pushed back, not with force, but with a stubborn insistence on my own truth. I was not a blank slate. I was not a vessel. I was Reid, and I was asterisk. The battle was not a clash of muscle and steel, but of will and memory, a silent scream in the depths of the underground tunnel system. I focused every fiber of my being, every cherished memory of my meticulous work, into the tip of that letter opener, into the earth. The entity raged, its projected memories tearing at the edges of my perception, trying to pull me apart. But I held on, a solitary, defiant spark in an ocean of encroaching oblivion. I was Reid, and I would not be consumed. I would not be replaced. My identity, painstakingly built and fiercely defended, was the only weapon I truly possessed.